show them this is what it is. And tell them what that means to you in your life too. That's what I was going to connect with, right? So if you talk about charity, so for example, if I talk about charity, I'll say, look, it's not, for me, that is an obligation. It's not something that I just, do as extra credit. It's an obligation for me. It's an obligation for us as Muslims. So I'll say that, so in that sense, we go on a routine basis, our family, and we make sure that we go to the soup kitchens and that we are doing activities where we're helping those in need. And we try to do that secretly and publicly, and we give, and our communities are actually very focused on that. We'll talk about that, right? So those are things you want to do. You want to humanize the Quran. Okay. Now, use humor if you can. A lot of people ask about this. If you can, use it. Weave it into your own story. When you're talking about your stories and whatnot, use humor to talk about it, because again, that humanizes. Inshallah, you're just doing that naturally. When you're talking, you're smiling. It lightens up the mood. Because I can tell you that a lot of times when you're talking to people about Islam, this is much more for a public setting, but they're going to be a little bit tense. Okay, nowadays. So if you lighten them up and show them that this is okay, we can relax, right? Relax them, they're more willing to listen to you as well. Okay, so it's not like a knock-knock joke. I'm saying just be a little bit lighthearted when you're talking about it. Now let's get to what you mentioned, commonalities. Exactly that. You should emphasize commonalities when you're speaking with somebody. Unfortunately, a lot of times, what we do is we talk about differences. Okay? The first thing, sometimes when people talk to a Christian, they say, oh, let me just get one thing straight. We don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. Okay? Do you understand? I know maybe we just don't understand. Do you understand what that means to a Christian? Right? That's a fundamental difference to them, right? It's a non-starter. They'll be like, oh, that's what they told me about. My parents told me about you. You understand what I'm saying? Don't start with that, right? Start with the commonalities, because there are so many. Right? So even if you want to talk about Jesus, peace be upon him, you can say, look, we believe Jesus. Jesus mentioned more than even Muhammad, peace be upon him. He mentioned more than most prophets. Not more than any prophet. Most prophets. He's mentioned many times. Right? Mary, she's mentioned more than the mother of the prophet, peace be upon him. Did we know that? Right? You see what I'm saying? But let's talk more about commonalities. I wouldn't even start with that, to be honest. I'd start more with, real commonalities. Charity, the belief in one God. Talk about, what else is there that's common? Right? The prophets in general. What else is common?
The books.
The books, right? What are some values that are common? I'm sorry, I didn't hear it. Belief in evil, you said? Angels, right? Angels, right? Yeah, that's your neighbor.
Life and death, heaven and hell.
Life and death, heaven and hell, exactly, yeah. And somebody said about the neighbors, taking care of your neighbors. That's what I heard. Yeah. So, who said that? Oh, right there. So, yeah, great, exactly, And you can talk about taking care of your parents and honoring your parents. Very important thing. Be surprising value, I think, to them. I think that's a commonality, but inshallah, they see it as a commonality. What else? That's a good question. So about covering up, I wouldn't start with that again in terms of commonalities, because nowadays, they don't view it as commonality, but that is how I would answer that question. When she was saying, should you talk about covering up? Because in the Bible, they also mention about covering up. In Corinthians, in the Bible, it talks about that. Either you cover up or you shave your head, So that's actually in the Bible as well, right? But I wouldn't start, by talking about that. I'd start by talking about real, undisputed commonalities, and I'd have those ready. Because again, that sets you on, this footing where there's a bond, right? There's something to talk about, and you think they're pretty obvious things, but they're obvious to you. But most people of other faiths have no exposure beyond seeing what they see on Fox News, and they've never even been exposed to your basic theology. And frankly, that's what I'm saying. To them, they've also justified by saying Allah is just something else, they think you're actually stuff with Allah, but they think you're praying to an idol. Okay? That's my point. You need to clear all that up, clarify that, these are our commonalities, and emphasize this. And, this is part of your preparation. When you go into it, you should, think about these things and brainstorm more. than what we talked about here. Honesty, that's another one, right? Humility. These are values that you want to talk about, even affirmatively what we're talking about in the Quran, but these are common values out of religions, right? Now, this is very important. You want to talk about what Islam is, not what it is not. Let's try something here. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you guys, can you follow instructions? Can everybody follow instructions pretty well? Right? I'm going to tell you something. Let's see if you can follow these instructions. Okay? I want you to close your eyes. Okay? And I want you to, whatever you do, you can think of anything you want, but don't think of an elephant. Close your eyes. Whatever you do, do not think of an elephant. Okay. Now, you can open your eyes. Who was able not to think about, even for a second, not to think of an elephant? Okay? And there's always one or two that think they didn't think of it, but if you're being honest, it flashed in your head. Okay? Right? You see what I'm saying? Like, when you start talking about what Islam is not terrorism. Islam doesn't oppress women. We don't oppress women. What do you think they're thinking? You're just associating the words even more, right? I mean, you're getting and playing into what's called their frame. Okay? It's called framing. In fact, there's a whole book called Don't Think of an Elephant by a guy named George Lakoff. Lakoff, right? And he talks about it in a political context, right? Because he's like a Democrat. He says the Democrats do this too much. They play into the hands of Republicans who are very good with using terms and words and whatnot, and they always use their words. So, and they play right into it. So think about that. So let's talk about what Islam is, but negate the things that we know people think negatively about Islam. Right? So if you want to talk about not oppressing women, don't say not oppressing women. Talk about affirmatively what does Islam give women in terms of rights, right? And their place in Islam. You can talk about the place of mothers in Islam and how high it is, and hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was asked, like who should I honor the most? Your mother, then your father. As a father, it is what it is, right? It is what it is. You have to accept it, right? But the point is, you can talk about that. You can talk about the rights of a woman to support. That she absolutely has that right. Of a man, and that that a man does not have the same right from her. These types of things. You can talk about these things affirmatively, right? That the woman has a right to be educated, to gain knowledge. That she is an individual addressed in the Quran as an individual, right? That she has her own individual connection with Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Talk about these things in the affirmative, and I can guarantee you that what's the natural conclusion that somebody's going to come to? If they were just hearing this, they're going to be like, well, if this is true, they might just say that again, if this is true, wow, that's what they're going to say, right? And so there's not going to be this question of, oh, Islam, oppresses women. It's sometimes for the men, it's like, wait, Islam gives women too many rights. No, I'm saying this, actually, non-Muslims saying that they don't, sisters can relax, but, the thing is that we're just not talking enough affirmatively. So let's take other things, okay? Talking about, instead of saying Islam doesn't condone terrorism, let's talk about how Islam honors life, right? The importance of life. And talk about that, and talk about how, in the Quran it says if you save the life of one, it's as if you saved all of mankind, right? You talk about that verse, and you say that affirmatively. And you talk about the rules historically, in terms of self-defense and whatnot, that there's volumes that have been written on the laws of war. I mean, because that's how serious war is considered. That you can't even use poison, arrows or things of that sort. There's been debate over these types of things. You understand what I'm saying? You talk affirmatively how it's such an important thing, like the preservation of life and all these things. Positive, right? Talk about it in a positive, and you negate a lot of these negative things. So that's an important thing. Okay, let's get to this quickly, and I want to get to like what you were talking about in terms of how do you address these things. Don't talk disparagingly about another faith. Okay, when you're talking to people. Okay? That's not what you should be doing. They're going to go on the defensive. Okay? Again, talk positively about Islam, talk about what Islam believes. You can talk about the fact that Islam does, but eventually you do need to get to the point where you do say, look, we believe in Jesus and we love Jesus, and in fact you must, as a Muslim. If you don't believe in Jesus, you're not